and welcome to another episode of For Want of a Nail. This week, Keaton, am joined by my co-host,
Mary.
Wonderful. Mary's a new face for those of us who have joined from our other podcast, the Worldwide Workshop. Mary, would you like to give just a quick breakdown of your sort of credentials when it comes to history?
Sure. I was very interested in history in elementary school. It was my favorite subject.
Really?
Yeah, it was. But I kind of went the techie route afterwards, so lost touch a little bit.
That could be the tagline for this podcast: is history by engineers for engineers.
That's really what you're getting this time.
That's fine. There's no reason. But you said you were a fan in elementary school. Did you have like a particular time period you were really interested in, or is it just whatever the teacher was going over that day?
I loved when we did like ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, like all the mythology.
Oh, yeah.
Was my favorite. And so when Percy Jackson came out, I devoured that whole series. Like every book was like in my collection. Whenever we would hit up not Costco, but like the local like wholesale store, it was like every week I would get a new discount Percy Jackson book.
I still say that Edith Hamilton and her book Mythology have done irreparable harm to an entire generation of American school children by getting them just absolutely fascinated in Greek mythology.
It's cool stuff.
I know, I love it. I had a huge Greek mythology phase. So, Mary, I asked you to be on this episode because you have a particular piece of expertise that I don't have, which is we're going to be talking about Albania for a large portion of it. And do you want to just give a brief overview of like how you're related to Albania?
Yeah, so I am Albanian. I have a lot of firsthand experience with being from Albania. So happy to let you tap into this expertise. So both my parents were born in Fier, Albania. Oh. It's a country, not a country. It's a city in the south of Albania, fairly close to the coast. It's like one city away from Vlor, which is like the more famous beach city.
Okay.
So yeah, they immigrated to the U.S. when my mom was 6 months pregnant with me. So I was born here, but the culture has always been a really big part of my life. I like speak the language. It's like the only way I can chat with my grandparents. And I guess around middle school, my dad got like really, what's the word? Like
passionate.
Not passionate. It's like, not like he got the ammunition. He got so when I was around like when I hit middle school, like preteen age, my dad like got the motivation to put me not in Albanian school. Like I had a lot of Polish friends that had like a super formal Polish school set up on the weekends where they would learn the language and like connect with others in the community. For us, it was like a middle-aged lady in her basement, me and my friend with an abetare, it's basically what you give kindergartners to learn the alphabet. And it has super basic sentences. And that was our formal education on like writing in Albanian. But fortunately, since it's a really phonetic language, if you know how to speak it, you really just, once you know the alphabet, you can just sound it all out for the most part. So
that does help me with how I assume some names. So I'm going to have some names coming up, and feel free to laugh at me as an ignorant Westerner.
Oh, I'm so excited.
I desperately try to say certain Albanian names.
Yeah.
But, and I that whole idea of just going to a basement and like learning a different language is so, I guess it's so foreign to me as like an ignorant American whose family is like, there's nothing interesting in my family. Nothing at all.
She really was like an aunt type figure. Like she didn't treat us the way like teachers in school teach their students. Like, not aunt, she like very grandmotherly attitude. I feel because we were still like rowdy, distracted kids that didn't want to be doing this on a weekend. And she had like a little nephew or something, like a child would show up on occasion, and he had this habit, like a little like 6-year-old kid or something. I don't know. He had a habit of eating raw spaghetti.
Raw spaghetti?
That was like his thing. He would like sneak into the cabinet like while we were in our lesson, and you'd hear like the crackling of raw spaghetti. And I left these lessons with the same habit. So
raw pasta noodles.
Yes.
I have eaten by accident raw pasta noodles before. It's not a fun experience. It's just hard, and yeah, that's crazy.
I really don't know. It was not a lifelong debilitating habit, fortunately, but I think we just wanted a distraction during these classes, and
that's fair.
Gnawing on spaghetti was the answer.
I used to eat paper in class when I was bored. I would just rip off little pieces of that. But so, go ahead and get started now.
Sure.
I'm going to be thinking about raw spaghetti noodles for a while.
It's the crunch.
We'll start off with this. Do you know what a Ponzi scheme is?
I do.
Do you know? Okay.
Essential oils come to mind.
I mean, I like comparing MLMs to Ponzi schemes, but Ponzi schemes are something kind of different than an MLM, but they are very similar.
What's an MLM?
Multi-level marketing. That's things like doTERRA, Herbalife,
yes,
all the essential oils you were mentioning.
Yeah.
But to talk about a Ponzi scheme, though, you have to learn about the guy who made them, and that is Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tebaldo Ponzi. He was born on March 3rd, 1882, in Lugo, Italy, to a family that had come from money, but had recently fallen on hard times. So they were basically like embarrassed rich people.
They suffered.
They did. They truly know the struggle of 1880s Italy.
Yeah.
I have no idea what 1880s Italy was like. It might have been a terrible place. It might have been great. Who knows?
They probably had raw pasta.
Yeah. Given how many Italians came to the United States in that time period, I'd imagine it wasn't the best place on earth. But he attended the University of Rome, La Sapienza. But he fell in with a crowd of rich boys that spent their money cavorting around the city instead of studying. And so that was the main thing when my mom sent me off to NYU. She was like, you better not fall in with those rich boys. But after 4 years, Ponzi left the school without a degree and broke. So in 1903, at the age of 21, he arrived in Boston in the United States in an effort to make a fortune and return his family in Italy to their old station. He had only about $2.50 in his pocket because he had gambled away all the other money during the boat ride over.
Classic.
I love that because there's always that cliche of like the old immigrant grandfather that's like, I came to this country with 3 nickels in my pocket. And then I love the idea of him doing that, but just being like, oh yeah, they gave me thousands of dollars, but I gambled it all away on the boat over.
Well, maybe he was hoping he didn't have to get off the boat.
Maybe if I lose all my money, they'll break my kneecaps and throw me in the ocean and I won't have to go to America.
Oh, I was hoping, you like whatever, you make your fortune gambling and then just round trip on the way back.
Like you don't even get off the boat. I made $50,000. You're going back to Italy, right? I don't even have to get off. I don't want to go through customs again. But he would spend a few years doing odd jobs up and down the East Coast while conning and stealing as he went. He basically really quickly realized that he didn't really have the work ethic for like a solid American job, and so he just started stealing. By 1907, he had given up on America and moved to Montreal, Canada, which at the time had a very large Italian immigrant community. It might still, but at the time it definitely did. And he got a job at the Banco Zarossi, run by Louis Zarossi, as a teller, but he quickly rose to the position of manager. He got this position because he spoke 3 languages by this point, Italian, English, and French. And he was supposedly extremely charismatic. which makes sense given his later crimes. But throughout this whole thing, one thing you hear all the time is he could talk you into anything as long as he had you alone in a room.
Sounds like a thief.
Yeah. Great thing for a thief to be is charismatic. Banco Zerosi was popular with the local immigrant community because they offered double the normal interest rate on deposits. So normally interest rate would be like 3%, but they were offering 6%.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anything about finance, so if I get anything wrong about interest rates or anything like that later on, don't say anything. Just let it be wrong.
Sure.
Money is fake and doesn't actually exist. It's all I'm trying to say.
Dogecoin.
Dogecoin. Oh God, I have so much money in Dogecoin.
Really? How much?
I think I own just under 600 coins of Dogecoin, which, if you do the math, isn't actually all that much. And I will say that I bought it when it was like a nickel, so I did make some money. But
yeah,
that's the only thing I've invested anything in over the past year.
Oh God, I know this is a tangent, but
no, it's fine.
Whenever I made my Robinhood account when I like didn't know anything about stocks, so I don't know, I would just get like one single stock here, like one single stock there, and whenever I had like change left over for my deposit, I was like, I like the Doge meme, like this is a fraction of a cent, like I'll just throw my extras in here just for fun. So when it started growing like crazy, I think I had like $11 worth of I had like put $11 in, so my gains were not enough to like, live my life forever without doing anything. But yeah, I have like 5,000 now.
Jesus.
Also about a nickel.
Okay.
And it's been a ride, especially this last week.
Oh God, I keep wondering if I should pull out or if like I should just stay in it. Like, it's going to go back up eventually, and it's probably not going to go below where I bought it at. So no matter what, I'm going to make money on it.
That's what I'm thinking too. And I have a friend who, at one point, had enough Doge to like pay for a year of rent.
Jesus,
which is insane. And he's holding. So if he can sit on that, like, I can sit too.
Just a heads up to anyone out there, this is not financial advice, but
this
buy
is
Doge.
Not financial advice. It's just a big joke.
Of course. When Ponzi became a manager, he learned that the bank was actually in serious financial trouble and that Louis was using the deposits of new investors to pay the returns of old investors. This at the time was called robbing Peter to pay Paul, and that's still a phrase you see all the time. And this is essentially the main mechanism of a Ponzi scheme nowadays. So this scheme existed prior to Charles Ponzi, but it did not. He's the one who really revolutionized it in America.
It's funny because I know it's going to happen. Like, I know where this story is going, but I was still surprised and disappointed to hear the path he's gone on.
He's letting everyone down. He started out so strongly, spending all his family's money in Italy, and then now he's spending all other people's money in Canada. But,
spending Paul's money.
Paul's. Well, no, he's paying Paul off. He's spending Peter's money.
Peter's money.
Yeah. Banco Zerosi would eventually fail, and Louis fled to Mexico with most of the remaining cash. Ponzi, once again penniless, began looking for more work, and he walked into the offices of a company called Canadian Warehousing, found them empty, found a checkbook, and cut himself a check for $423.58.
It's been easier to forge things those days.
I mean, there wasn't anything like a driver's license back then, so if you just showed up with a check that was like looked legit, they'd just give it to you. But he was arrested and did 3 years in Canadian prison for the theft, which I think translates to like 5 hours in a booking cell in the United States, but I don't know what Canadian prison was like at the time.
Wasn't he in Mexico?
No, Louis, the owner of the bank he was working at, fled to Mexico.
Okay, gotcha.
But he remained in Canada. After he got out, he was fed up with Canada and decided to return to the United States, but got caught as part of a scheme to smuggle illegal immigrants into the United States from Canada. And he spent 2 years in an Atlanta prison. He explained the prison stay in letters home to his mom by telling her that he had gotten a job as the warden's assistant. Which is just so sad. In actuality, the warden was using him to translate the mail of a mob boss that was staying in the prison. So there was an Italian mob boss in the prison, and he was one of the few inmates that could speak Italian and was willing to be like, didn't have any connection to the mob.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
It wasn't that big of a lie.
Technically, he was working for the warden.
Yeah,
just not in the capacity she thought. Upon his release, Ponzi moved back to Boston and promptly married a stenographer named Rose Maria Ganeco. It's a GN thing, which I think is technically just an N sound, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. In addition, while working for a mining company, he donated 220 square inches of his skin to a fellow injured worker that he had never met.
All right.
Yeah, so there was a part of him that genuinely wanted to help people, it looks like. And for his kindness, the operation caused him to develop pleurisy, which is like a really bad skin infection. And he lost his job while recuperating.
Wait, how big was this patch again?
220 square inches.
So what does that look like?
Oh, God. I mean, that's like a square foot is 144 square inches. So that's a large section.
So bigger than a square foot.
Yeah. Probably like a foot and a half square.
That's
I don't know.
crazy.
Let's see. Well, 225
so, like, off his
is
back or
15.
probably.
So it'd be 15 inches squared. Yeah, it'd have to be. That or they like took it from a bunch of different sections. But either way, that's got to be painful.
Especially back then.
Yeah, we're talking we're talking World War I era medicine. This was not the brightest time to be alive.
Yeah.
After that, though, he stumbled upon a scheme using international reply coupons, or IRCs. These were coupons that could be included in international mail, so the recipient of the letter could exchange them for return postage. So basically, if I was in Italy, and I was sending you a letter in the United States, I would include these in there, so that way, basically, I bought the postage in Italy, you could then take them into the post office, and they'd give you equivalent U.S. postage to ship the letter back.
Gotcha.
So, importantly, the cost of postage was paid at the rates of the country of the initial sender. And the Italian postage was far cheaper than American postage. So essentially, you could buy $1 worth of IRCs in Italy, send them over, and get like $5 worth of American postage. Mm-hmm. Which is a pretty good deal.
Is this going to go somewhere?
You'll see.
I hear the trick.
Ponzi realized that one could buy IRCs in Italy for cheap and exchange them for much more expensive American stamps, thus making a profit, theoretically.
There it is.
So, to start up the scheme, though, Ponzi needed money. So he set up a modest company called the Securities Exchange Company to attract investors. He offered 100% returns after 90 days. So,
pretty good.
Such good terms and being so charismatic, money just started pouring in. He employed the same strategy he had seen Louis Zerosi use in Canada and started taking money from new investors to pay the returns of the old ones. To keep money flowing in, he started hiring salesmen to go out and get new investors. And Ponzi would take money from literally anybody, including family. At one point, 75% of all cops in Boston had money in the scheme, and people from all walks of life were investing. Some people even mortgaged their homes and emptied their life savings to put money into the scheme. Man. And so that's the crazy thing is you see a guy who's just so selfless, he'll literally give you the skin off his back. Mm-hmm. But he'll also then turn around and just watch as you invest your life savings into a scheme he knows is not turning a profit. Which is crazy.
Yeah. Can we curse on this?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
That's fucked.
Yeah, it is fucked. It's real fucked. It's it takes a special kind of scumbag to be a con man.
Yeah. Man.
But it was about at this time that Ponzi realized an issue. He had no way to convert these American stamps into cash. And there was no market to sell IRCs. Mm-hmm. So he had this thing that was theoretically generating value, but he had no way of actually generating any value out of it. Mm-hmm. And this meant there was no legitimate income stream for the scheme. His success was growing, though, and the scheme was taking in almost $1 million a day, which is obscene. Wow. And that's in, like, that time's money.
Yeah.
Attention started being paid to the scheme, and some financial analysts pointed out that not only was the amount of returns promised impossible with the number of IRCs in circulation in the world, but also that Ponzi himself was not investing in his own scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ponzi hired a publicist to stem the tide of bad press named William McMasters. And William immediately became suspicious of Ponzi and did some digging, finding damning evidence of the classic robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Ponzi hired this publicist to come in, fix his public image. That publicist is then later like, you're a fucking crook, turns around and finds the evidence of the scheme. And he's the reason Ponzi went down.
Wow.
He published an article detailing how bad the scheme was, which prompted a series of runs on the scheme, which Ponzi paid out in full. So at this time, there was still some cash reserves left. And so people that were actually showing up at the location in Boston were getting their money back, which prompted some of them to believe that all the bad press was overhyped and then turn around and put it right back in.
he really had him.
He was a really smooth talker.
All publicity is good publicity, I guess.
All news is good news. The walls were coming down, though, and on August 12th, Ponzi handed himself over to authorities. 6 banks in Boston were wiped out by the collapse of the scheme, and it is estimated that investors lost almost $200 million in today's money.
That's crazy.
All told. After the collapse, Ponzi would do 10 years in jail and then spend the rest of his life on the run from the authorities as they attempted to bring more charges against him, and he resorted to pulling smaller and smaller cons to get by. Eventually, he died in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, on January 18th, 1948. The scheme he had implemented would forever after be known as the Ponzi scheme.
What a legacy.
What a legacy. What a shitbag. But you might have noticed a distinct lack of Albania in that story.
So far, yeah.
So far, yeah. Now, I didn't bring you here just to talk about Charles Ponzi. I brought you here to talk about Albania. And for a good chunk, about one specific Albanian. I want to know if you can guess who that is.
I think you're going to say our good comrade, the dictator.
A good comrade, the dictator. Do you know his name out of curiosity?
I do. I do, but I want to hear you say it first.
Okay. Enver Hoxha.
Pretty good.
Hey, I looked up a pronunciation on that one. I'll admit.
Yeah, Enver Hoxha.
I will admit that I read his name a lot more before I ever heard anyone pronounce it, and I used to think it was Hoxha because that's how it's spelled.
I mean, that's valid. We have a lot of letters that we consider like a single letter, but they're 2 consonants put together. So the X and the H is an example of that.
Yeah, which it makes like the DJ sound in English.
So it would be like J.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he anyway. DJ. Yeah, that the pronunciation guide I saw had a D in front of the J, so it's like a Hoxha. But I don't know how.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I know things. I'm smart. He was born on October 16th, 1908 in Gjirokastar?
yeah. Gjirokastar.
Gjirokastar. Okay.
Yeah,
Albania. And was named after noted Turkish leader Enver Pasha.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's where the Enver comes from.
Just fun fact about the last name. Like we say Pasha. I'm pretty sure it's like like you said, like I'm pretty sure it comes from the Turkish. Because we were like under Ottoman rule for such a long time, so it bled into the language. But like a pasha is like, I think it's like what they called the Ottoman leaders. So a common thing for like little baby boys, like they're super spoiled in the culture, and it's like something you would call like, just like a spoiled little boy is like a pasha, like a king, like just resting.
Yeah, it's like when a child makes a demand of their mother, and they're like, "Yes, my lord," like very obscene.
Literally, yeah.
I think doesn't that mean teacher? Right? I think I remember reading that.
Is it?
Or it was like
Maybe.
a type of Islamic teacher of some sort in the
Yeah,
area?
yeah. That's the context I've always known it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. At the time of his birth, though, Albania was part of the Ottoman Empire, with independence being proclaimed on November 28th, 1912, 4 years after his birth. His father was a Sufi cloth merchant that traveled widely across Europe and the United States. And his early life was not particularly noteworthy. He was a bright student, and his father's success allowed him to receive education. But beyond that, there's not really that much particularly interesting about his upbringing. In 1930, he was given the opportunity to attend university in France. And while in college, his studies flourished, but he did fall in with a group of communists and Albanian expats. I love the word expat. It's a great word.
It's a good word.
Yeah. Upon his return to Albania in 1936, he got work as a teacher, living up to his name. On April 7th, that's actually a weird thing.
Yeah, I love that.
There's a lot of future dictators that like start out as teachers. Mussolini was going to be an elementary school teacher. Stalin went to seminary to become a priest. And Hoxha worked as a teacher. Yeah. Well, basically that was because in Georgia at the time, the only way to be successful if you weren't a noble was to become a priest. His mother really wanted him to be a bishop. Nah, it didn't work out. Oh God. They say that the only person in the world that Stalin actually feared was his mother.
Good.
Yeah. She used to call him old Jugi.
Oh.
Because his actual name was Josef Visanovich Jugashvili. Jugi. But enough about Stalin. We're talking about a different dictator who actually really loved Stalin. On April 7, 1939, Fascist Italy invaded Albania and established a puppet kingdom. So they got rid of old King Zog and brought in their own fascist kingdom as a puppet. And Enver became close with a group of communist partisans. It's Enver, right? I'm saying that part right, at least?
We say Enver.
Enver,
but
okay. That's fine.
Anyway, to like translate it to English is, I guess, Enver.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
When the Communist Party of Albania was established on November 8th, 1941, he was selected as one of the Muslim representatives on the party's Central Committee.
Interesting.
Yeah. He began writing propaganda and giving speeches calling on the peasants of Albania to fight against the fascist occupiers.
That does sound right.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good thing. Everyone should rise up all the time and fight the fascist occupiers. I think we can all get behind that statement. But he wasn't really on the front lines. He was more of just a political head of the party. In March of 1943, he was elected the first secretary of the Communist Party of Albania. And this is a post he would hold until his death, which is always a great sign for somebody in their 40s? No, 30s.
I know he was like 70, I want to say 76?
Spoiler alert, he died in 85. Yeah, he was 76.
There you go.
Job. Nice. Did you do any research before? Because I did tell you we're going to be talking about Albania, so. Yeah,
no, I mean, I don't want to spoil the fact that he died. But my grandma was pretty involved, locally with the party, and she was pretty strong communist. And after she passed away, she'd like to save lots of documents and books and things. And we saw that she had saved all the newspapers from every publication. One was for either his 70th or his 75th birthday, some big birthday of his. And then it was the special edition that came out when he died, the first day, which was at an off hour. And then the full publication the next day from all the different newspapers.
Wow.
And it was really interesting to go through and read them, and it was all our comrade has fallen, all this just really gassing him up. And obviously I wasn't around,
of course,
at the time, and my parents don't really talk about it too much, but they must have been, I don't know, high school, early college. But it was like a really emotional thing for everybody. Like,
I can imagine.
Like my mom is not, super interested in like history and politics. But she said even she cried when she found out he had passed away, which is like, I don't know, like a crazy thought to me that,
Yeah.
to have that much love for a leader.
I can't imagine a single president that if like I found out they died, I would cry.
Yeah.
Then again, I haven't liked any of the presidents so far, so
there's a museum in Albania called Bunkart, which is like bunk, like, and then art. And it's so I don't know, maybe this will come up, but there's like a bunch of bunkers.
That's gonna come up.
Yeah. And they've turned them into a museum.
Okay.
And there's like a little spot where they talk about his death, and like pictures of people like at the funeral or whatever, and everyone is like sobbing, like violently sobbing, and it's just like, it was crazy for me, as someone who grew up here to see images like that.
Yeah. It's like whenever one of the Kims dies in North Korea, there's always footage of like people like throwing themselves to the ground in the streets and stuff.
Exactly like that. I remember, I don't know what it was. It was some like parody video. Maybe it was like College Humor even, like a long time ago. And it was kind of just like poking fun at like all this propaganda. But it was kind of like how North Korea like portrays itself to like everyone else, and they were like photoshopping like it was like photoshopping a picture of like the audience whatever, it was like the dictator and like the crowd, and they made the crowd bigger, and then they like zoomed in on a face and they added all these tears and like I remember at the museum like seeing these pictures and being like, is this a joke? Like, wow. Different times.
Different times. Italy, of course, did not win World War II, thank God. And on November 29th, 1944, the last fascist garrisons were driven from Albania.
So long.
So long. Thanks for nothing, you pieces of shit. In the aftermath of the war, elections were organized during which the only party on the ballot was the coalition of parties known as the Democratic Front. The Democratic Front was dominated by the Communist Party. And reportedly, 93% of Albanians voted for the Democratic Front in the ensuing election. Which is interesting. Like, you see this a lot in, like, the Soviet Union and other single-party states, where, like, voter turnout is actually the most important part of the election, since there's only one party on the ballot. So it's just about whether, like, in the Soviet Union, for local elections, if less than 50% of the populace voted out to vote for a candidate, despite there only being one candidate, then that person didn't win, even though they got 100% of the votes.
Oh, wow.
And that they would then be rescinded, and the party would put forward a different candidate. But on January 11th, 1946, King Zog of Albania was deposed, and the People's Republic of Albania was proclaimed. Enver was now the de facto head of state and the most powerful person in the country. There's a story that King Zog, he held a pretty weird claim to fame. Do you know what it is?
I don't think so. I think you've told me like once before.
He is regarded as the world's most prolific smoker in history.
All right.
Yeah, I think it was said that he would go through something like 12 or 11 packs a day, which is absurd, absolutely absurd. But
his name means bird.
Zog means bird.
Yeah, Zog.
Zog.
Yeah, it's a bird.
Interesting. King Bird.
King Bird.
I love that. So, being a Marxist-Leninist in post-war Europe, Enver had to choose between siding with Marshal Tito in Yugoslavia or Comrade Stalin in the USSR. Enver became an avowed Stalinist and immediately began emulating his new hero. He purged all his political enemies, he consolidated absolute power in himself, built a strong cult of personality around his person, redistributed land across the country, and began rebuilding Albania from the devastation of World War II. Between 1948 and 1960, the Soviet Union gave Albania $200 million worth of aid. And when Stalin died on March 5th, 1953, Albania entered an official period of mourning that lasted for 14 days. That is longer than the period of mourning that that was observed in the USSR.
Wow.
So, Albania was more beat up over Stalin's death than the country he led.
No, it was a big deal. Like just Russia in general, like that was the language my grandpa learned while he was in school. Like, I don't know. He's just like always, even now, like it's not something I've ever pressed him on. But just growing up, he just like make jokes about, I don't know, just always talking about Russia. It's like embedded in that generation for sure.
There is an interesting phenomenon that you see even in modern day Russia and other like Soviet bloc countries where they're like Stalin is consistently considered like one of the greatest leaders of Russian history. And a big part of it is just the current situation and the past decades of instability have really made the older generations look back on that period with just really rose-colored glasses. Because I'm as far left as they come pretty much, but even I hate Stalin.
Yeah.
But
the boomers.
After Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev became the leader of the Soviet Union. He began implementing reforms such as decrying Stalin's personality cult, reorganizing the Soviet economy, and taking a less outwardly antagonistic attitude towards the West, which Enver did not like at all. He wanted to fight the Americans. He wanted to keep this personality cult around, mostly because he had one and he didn't like somebody else saying their shit. And he did not like reorganizing the economy, because currently Albania's economy was working just fine for it. So he began to very unsubtly realign itself with China and Mao Zedong. Khrushchev would later say of Hoxha, especially shameless was the behavior of that agent of Mao Zedong, Enver Hoxha. He bared his fangs at us even more menacingly than the Chinese themselves. After his speech, Comrade Dolores Ibarruri, a Spanish communist, an old revolutionary and a devoted worker of the communist movement, got up indignantly and said, very much to the point, that Hoxha was like a dog who bites the hand that feeds it.
Something that came to mind, I don't know, maybe an interesting parallel to think about, like a really big part of Albanian culture is the hospitality. Like, if you have a guest come into your house, like they are treated like royalty. Like, we will go like above and beyond to make a guest feel welcome. Even if like even if they're not a friend, like even a stranger, like it's a really big part of the culture. So I don't know, just thinking of that and thinking about how we mourned longer than the Russians, or like we fought harder than Mao. I don't know, just interesting to think about.
By 1961, Albania had been kicked out of the Warsaw Pact, and Hoxha was describing Stalin as the last communist leader of the USSR. Which is just that I love this kind of petty bullshit that the communist states went through. Like, there's a whole thing called the Sino-Soviet split, where like basically Mao and Khrushchev just absolutely hated each other, and they like the big sign that they split was that emissaries of the USSR were no longer allowed to do the Soviet kiss of friendship with emissaries from the China. It was this thing where they would just full on like on the mouth make out with each other. And it was a socialist sign of brotherhood, essentially. But I just love the idea of that being a real sting of like, we're not just going to make out with you at formal dinners anymore. I think there's a famous picture of like, I think it's Brezhnev, one of the leaders of the Soviet Union, making out with the leader of East Germany. That was pretty.
Berlin Wall.
Not on the that was painted on the Berlin Wall, but I think it was definitely in East Germany. Yeah.
Well, there you go, connecting the dots.
Beginning in 1967 and continuing until 1986, the Albanian military leadership, under orders of Hoxha, carried out a policy of bunkerization. I said it would come back. During this time, do you have any idea how many bunkers were built?
I don't know, but I think we do have. I don't know what the stat is exactly. I'm sure you probably have it ready to go. But
if you had a guess, how many would you think it is?
Somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000.
Wow. I'm shocked, honestly. During this time, 173,371 bunkers were built across the country.
Yeah.
There's two things I love about that. A, it is so much higher than your estimate, which just goes to show how ludicrous an idea this is. Albania is a very small country. I think it's about the size. I think it has about the same land area as, like, I want to say New Jersey, maybe Pennsylvania.
I feel like it's bigger. So for reference, I recently learned that Italy, the size of Italy, is comparable to Arizona.
Okay,
which surprised me.
And Albania is about, like, I want to say, like, half the height of Italy.
Maybe less.
I think it is less. So I'd be willing to say it's about the size of Pennsylvania. Does that make sense?
I'll take it.
Okay.
I'll take it.
So building 175,000 bunkers in Pennsylvania is absurd.
Yeah. Wow.
There's a story that the guy who designed the bunkers, he took the design to Hoxha, and Hoxha, like, they did a test run at it. It's just, like, shot it up a bunch. I think set off some explosions near it, and it went great. And the guy was like, "Oh, see, it's wonderful." And Hoxha was like, "Get in it." And so the guy got in it, and then he had a tank drive over the bunker to test it out.
You got to do it for the party.
You got to do it. Well, if you don't do it, he'll shoot you. So
yeah.
After the death of Mao in 1978, Albania became even more isolated, and the bunkers became an increasingly important focus for Hoxha and his paranoia. They were a massive drain on the small country's limited budget, and they are probably the most prominent element of Hoxha's legacy in the West. In fact, there's a joke amongst online leftists of Hoxhaism. His ideology is basically just Stalinism, but you build bunkers everywhere. Which isn't unfair, given what he actually did.
I mean, it's just so funny to me because, like, whenever I would visit as a kid, like, you would see bunkers, like, it was totally, but I, like, didn't know what they were, you know? It just looks like a round concrete thing from the top, like, nothing crazy.
Yeah.
Like, you just have, like, kids running on top of them and, like, playing around them, and, like, it's just one of those things that never, like, it never registers how ridiculous their presence is.
My favorite thing about them is they're just in the middle of nowhere. Like, they'd be put on city blocks, or, like, on the beach, or in the middle of a field, or in a park. Like, no idea of, like, oh, this is a strategically defensible position. No, this is just an open space. We're going to put a bunker there.
I mean, I don't know. They just feel so unassuming. I don't know, especially coming from New York. I don't know. Like, I'm not afraid of concrete, you know? So.
Yeah, exactly. It's fair to say, though, that Hoxha's reign was not entirely political repression and diplomatic isolation. He did succeed in drastically reducing the malaria rate in the country. Literacy came up to almost 100% under his time in the country. And Albania was the first country in the world to be completely electricalized. I forget the term, but basically every house had access to electricity. Even before the United States.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, we were size of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do it. Don't get me wrong, but sadly, Enver Hoxha died on April 11th, 1985, of heart issues. He was 76 years old. And thus, the light of our world has gone out.
That's what the newspapers said. Every single one of them said the same thing. Basically.
The struggle for socialism is dead.
No, they were like, you know, at first I was confused because, like, my Albanian vocabulary is pretty limited. Like, I know how to say the things you would say to your grandparents to, like, update them about your life. But even that got to the point, like, when I took calculus in high school, like, couldn't find the word for calculus. My parents couldn't find it either. So it just became math. And my career onward just became computer. And they're like, oh, yes, we know what those are.
As somebody who speaks to their grandparents in English, it's not much better.
There you go. Wait, where was I going with this?
The language in the newspapers around his death. The light of the struggle for socialism has ended. The light of the world has gone out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, right. Here we go. So all the newspapers, the word for comrade is shock, which is also the word we use for like friend.
Okay.
So I had only seen that word used like my friend this, my friend that. And so I was reading these newspapers like, wow, they're really just throwing the word friend around like every sentence.
As a lowly newspaper editor, my good personal friend Enver Hoxha has died.
Yeah, no, really, it's like that. It's like friends, our great friend. And then on like the top corner of the newspaper, they have like, the like scathe symbol, and like a little, I forget what the exact message is. Maybe I can find it for you after.
Sure.
But like it has the word comrade in it, and that's, I mean, the same word, but in that context, I was like, we're talking communism here. We're not friends. We're comrades. So,
friendship is banned in Albania.
Yeah,
you are only comrades.
But I don't know. So it depends on like who you talk to from like different parts of the country. But I know like the region my family is from, like people loved him.
Really?
Because they feel like he really lifted people out of poverty. Like especially the literacy thing was a big one. Like, he just scooped up all these farmers and was like, you're going to learn how to read and write. And that was like a really big deal for people, like they felt, respected.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, there were plenty of families that were very wealthy and had all this property and were used to like this whole lifestyle, and it either got taken from them or voluntarily, or it got taken from them
involuntarily,
and at best they were imprisoned. And like I do know people whose grandparents like went through that and like lost family in that kind of struggle. So
yeah, if you ever want to hear stories like that, just go to Miami and talk to some Cuban exiles.
There you go.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
My grandfather's plantation was taken away in the revolution, and so. But that's the thing is, like, with Soviet-style economics like that, you always end up with so many people who look back on it really fondly because at the end of the day, the government gave you everything you needed. It gave you a job, it gave you an education, it gave you a house, it gave you food, but you didn't get any say in it, and it just gave you that stuff. So, like, if you didn't want that apartment, tough shit. If you didn't want that job, tough shit.
For both of those. I remember learning about the history of like my grandma's apartment and how it was like a really big deal that she got the apartment she got, because she was, she's like kind of like in an HR sort of role, like she had a little bit of sway in her job. And so she was a widower. My grandfather passed away when my dad was a baby. So it was her and, her two kids. So they were 3. And then there were like, her brothers were around, all the time, but really for a group of 3 like that, there's no way they would like give you a 2-bedroom apartment, right? Like not a chance, but she
pulled
made
some
it
strings.
Work. And to be fair, like that apartment was absolutely like always full of people. Like the door was always open. But yeah, and regarding the job stuff, something that was so hard for me to comprehend as someone who grew up in America, where like you can study whatever you want. So not everyone could go to college, right? Because there was only so much need. And the way it worked was like if you scored high enough on your exams or whatever, you would be like admitted to the university, but they would choose your major for you. and my dad had the hookup. So he got to study what he wanted, which was history
Nice.
and archaeology. But my mom was thrown into like, I don't know if it was chemistry or like petroleum engineering, like something like super heavy duty like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she was so miserable, like had like never failed in her life and was suddenly just like not good at school.
That's gotta be unfortunate.
She was also lucky that my grandparents were able to get her to switch, and she ended up studying philosophy.
Oh, nice.
But like, you know, you would hope you could go to school and then you don't choose what you study. Like, it's just such an absurd concept to me. Like, I can't comprehend.
I think of that giant board of jobs from the Bee Movie, where it's like you just pick one and that's what you do for the rest of your life. But you don't even get to pick. They're just like, oh, we need some coal miners in outside Tirana, so you're going there.
Yeah, literally.
Though I will have to say that for like certain fields, that kind of existence probably wouldn't be that terrible. Like, I mean, historians, academics, artists, stuff like that, you have a consistent living space. You have consistent food supply. Mm-hmm. It really, you're getting government support if you support the government, all that. So, but yeah.
Important asterisk.
Yeah, important asterisk. Very important asterisk.
I have one more tangent for you.
Go ahead.
My grandma had this, I'm not quite sure like what kind of book this was. It kind of had like a yearbooky feel. It kind of just celebrated, I guess, the key members of the party, and it was just like full of photographs of like groups of people and like descriptions of things they had done, and it was in 3 languages. So it was in Albanian, English, and I believe French.
Interesting.
So it was, I don't know, a marketing piece, I guess. But yeah, I found this book in my grandma's apartment, and I was flipping through it. It's like one of those like glossy, heavy like coffee table type books.
Yeah.
And I start flipping, and I notice there's some pieces that are ripped out of this book, and I like keep flipping, and I'm like in group photos, like there's a head missing. Or like a person has just been like ripped out of the photograph. And then I look more closely, and like in the subtitle, like a name is scribbled out. Or like a name is ripped out, and like I keep flipping, and in all the languages, like that name is ripped out. And yeah, like I never thought like of my grandmother as like I don't know, a young like person like thinking about politics, like she's just my grandma, like makes the good soups and stuff, like
not thinking like, oh, Tommy got taken by the secret police, so now I have to remove him from all of my yearbooks.
Exactly. And yeah, like it just goes to show, like, I don't know, the mindset was just so different. Like,
yeah,
I don't know, like we can never really understand what it would be like to grow up in an environment like that.
There's that famous picture of, I think it's from the Russian Civil War. It's Stalin at a table, and there's like 3 guys with him. And it was like when he became dictator, he really wanted that picture put out. But then over time, those 3 men each got purged. And so there's just like after each purge, they would just put out a new version of the picture where that person had been taken out. And so there's just this progression of from 4 people to just him alone in the picture. And it's such a good, like, sort of timeline of his taking power.
Yeah.
But on that note, we do have 2 stories here that now need to be tied together. So we've got Soviet-style Albania and Ponzi schemes, and they go together wonderfully. Albania was swept up in the tide of anti-communist revolutions that swept the Eastern Bloc in the early 1990s. A conservative party called the Democratic Party arose and took control of the country, and they were led by Sali Berisha?
Sali
Berisha.
Yes.
Who became president. Berisha immediately began reforming the country into a Western-style capitalist democracy pretty much overnight. Entire swaths of the country were privatized in a matter of weeks. Citizens suddenly had to grapple with things like rent and interest and debt and all the other lovely hallmarks of a modern capitalist financial system. Mm-hmm. At the beginning of the reforms, there were 3 banks in Albania. Reportedly. I'm not exactly sure about this, but I've heard that there were only 3 banks in the entire country, which makes sense. This is a country that didn't really have currency. Like there wasn't really a need for fiat currency up until this point.
Don't get me started on the currency. This is more of a social thing for me. So there was some point where they changed the way they changed the currency, basically, where if something used to be 10,000 lek, now it's 1,000 lek. They just shaved off a zero pretty much. And politically, well, maybe before I jump into that. So people will say oh, it costs this much with the old money, or it costs this much with the new money. And so, of course, politicians love to use that all the time if they want to make something seem bigger than it is or smaller than it is. But socially, whenever I visit, I always feel so vulnerable if I try to go to a store and buy anything, because
there's 2 prices for everything.
Yeah, because sometimes casually it's easier for the older, not even the older generation, for most people to just use the old money because that's what they grew up with, and intuitively how much an apple costs or something. You're not gonna think an apple costs 10 times or whatever, 100, much more than it actually does. But as an American, coming in, I just always feel so stupid. Just being alone.
You walk out and they're oh, it was only 5 lek for this apple. And it's that's $20 or something.
At the mercy of my cousins.
Yeah. Berisha had also failed to implement many of the consumer protection and anti-fraud measures that exist in most of the capitalist world. The World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund had been brought in, and they strongly encouraged him to implement these things. But he felt that it wasn't necessary because he just believed Albanians wouldn't defraud each other. And he just didn't want to. They just didn't think it was necessary because they didn't have experience with a capitalist system like that. And it's also not to say that if those systems had been put in place, this whole thing could have been avoided, because the government just didn't really want to pay attention to it. Almost immediately, banks began appearing offering massive returns on investments in very short periods of time. These took off, and soon 21 such schemes had been established and were operating in Albania. And these are high-profile schemes. People from all over the country began investing everything into these schemes. Many sold their homes and possessions in order to put more money into the scams because they had assets, but they didn't have any physical cash. Right. The government even began investing into them, despite warnings from outside financial experts. This is the IMF coming in and being hey, this is a scam. Stop it. This is bad. Get out. And the government's just nah, fuck you, and putting more money into it. Which, if an organization as evil as the International Monetary Fund is coming to you and saying that something's a scam, listen to them.
And this was what year?
This
Are
is
we still in the 90s or we're past that?
This is early 90s. This is between 1991 and 1997.
Okay.
So right around the time we would have been born. Mm-hmm. How old are you?
22.
22. Okay, so you're a child.
You've got a year on me, I think.
I'll be 25 in August.
All right, so you got 2.
The government even began investing in them. It is estimated that as much as $1.5 billion was invested between 1992 and December of 1996 by 2/3 of the population. 2/3 of the entire country had money in these schemes. At that time, monthly income was on average $80. So that's the average income, and $1.5 billion is in these schemes.
Hold on, you said monthly?
Monthly, yeah. So that's $960 a year. That's crazy. These schemes immediately began funneling most of the money out of the country and into arms deals. Some were going into arms deals as just a way to make more money, and other ones were just like now suddenly, in the same way Ponzi was when he had his schemes going, desperately looking for any way to make this thing viable in the long run. You had places that were offering 100, 150, sometimes even 200% returns on deposits. And the schemes began to collapse between January 8th and 16th of 1997.
Yeah.
Basically, the big ones realized they would no longer be able to pay off investors and immediately closed out and tried to flee the country. Some of them got away, and some of them did not and were put up against the wall and shot. We'll see in a bit. But almost immediately, the protests and riots began. The many well-stocked arms caches in the nation were raided, including some which contained chemical weapons, and soon the government had lost control of most of the country, especially the South, which was in complete rebellion. The police and military were no use in putting down the insurrection, as they were suddenly no longer getting paid, because the government had gone bankrupt. At one point, it was estimated that every male in the country ages 10 and up had at least one firearm and ample ammunition.
Really?
Yeah. There's stories of reporters in the country at the time going around and seeing like a checkpoint set up on the road, which was fairly common because gangs were just controlling most of the countryside. And coming up to the checkpoint, and there's just like an 11-year-old with an AK. And he's like demanding money to be let through.
You know, I really have to ask.
This is a fascinating thing that happened that no one really talks about because it happened in such a small country that, like, let's be fair, most of the Western world doesn't really give much of a shit about Albania.
Oh, yeah, someone asked me, when I was going to go visit Albania again.
Albania?
In high school, I was like, you sound so stupid right now.
I love it because I know it's just mixing up Algeria and Albania, but I do love the idea of a country where it's just basically an Oktoberfest all year long, and they call it Alberia.
Alberia.
That's great. Oh, social order very quickly broke down, and armed gangs began to roam the country. The opposition Socialist Party of Albania immediately began calling for new elections to handle the crisis, and they were most popular in the south of the country. Thousands of people began fleeing from Albania to Italy to escape the violence and economic collapse. Yes. It was a massive refugee crisis. And to Italy's credit, they were absolute assholes about it. And the Italian Navy went out into the ocean to try to shoot at these refugee boats coming over. Mm-hmm. Fucking pieces of shit.
There's a really famous, I don't know if you're going to get there, but there's a really famous image I guess they have videos of it too, of just this ship just like full of refugees, like jumping off to like get to Italy, basically.
Really? I hadn't heard about that. We are going to talk about one specific instance, but there was one. You're good. There was one specific example of two fighter pilots that were working for the government, taking off from their air base in the north of Albania for a bombing run against the south, though they would later claim that they weren't actually on a bombing run, it was just for reconnaissance. And they ran the mission, and then instead of returning to the base, they just flew to Italy and landed and immediately applied for refugee status. Which is crazy. The Air Force is actively fleeing the country.
Yeah.
On March 28th, the UN passed a resolution to help resolve the situation, and peacekeeping forces were dispatched. They quickly set about pacifying and disarming the populace while providing aid. This is interesting, where like you think of UN efforts in the Balkans, they don't usually go well. I'm thinking of Kosovo. I'm thinking of the dissolution of the Yugoslavia. This one went off without a hitch. On August 11th, UN peacekeepers declared their mission accomplished and left Albania. They were there for 6 months, which is absurd. There is no UN peacekeeping operation in history that has been that successful.
Yeah.
The Berisha agreed to snap elections for some reason. He seemed to genuinely think he was going to win, despite having caused the collapse of the economy.
He was running recently.
He was prime minister again for a while in the 2000s. Yeah.
Again, it depends like what region you go to. how people feel about him. Like,
of course. The Socialist Party, though, in this particular election, won in a landslide, and set about rolling back some of the capitalist reforms Berisha had implemented. It is estimated that between 2,000 and 3,600 people died in the Albanian Civil War, as it later became called. But it's all because Ponzi schemes caused the collapse of the Albanian economy, because they just didn't know how to handle capitalism after the death of Enver Hoxha.
It's so great. Like, so many people left. Like, Here, let me show you. I found a thing with some pictures. But basically, this like cargo ship. Hold up. Yeah. So this.
Oh, this is on 1991. Interesting.
Yeah, this was in 91. And this cargo ship had returned from Cuba, but it had to like go through some repairs, and it was kind of just like sitting there in Durrës, which is a little bit west of Tirana, the capital, and people just like came up to this ship in hopes of boarding it and going to Italy. And if you see these pictures, like every inch of this boat is covered, and there's like crowds of people looking on, and like
that's crazy.
They were just so desperate to leave, and like there's like pictures of people like hanging off the side of this boat, like jumping off this boat, just trying to be somewhere else.
That's insane. Yeah, I'll put a link to this in the description of the podcast for anyone listening.
Yeah, and now, there's not a lot of young people in Albania that, like, I mean, at least, from what I know, being over here, that really want to stay. I feel like the mentality is always, mostly because, like, a lot of people, like my parents' generation left. There's lots of Albanians in Italy, in Greece, like neighboring countries, but also like the US and Canada. And so people have ties now, to family in other parts of the world. And, they just want to move on up, have their American dream, like.
Yeah.
And so whenever we go back, a lot of areas feel super, dead. And it's just, the grandparents on their strolls, and the people who like haven't been able to, immigrate elsewhere, just kind of sitting in coffee shops all day, which, like sounds like the life to just like sip your espresso like in the morning and then like have some raki at night. But it gets like sad if you stay there too. Like for the first time, I used to always, whenever I visited Albania, it was over the summer. It's beautiful in Albania in the summer. It's like, to me, like one of the most beautiful places in the world. Like the beaches and the mountains. Like it's just wonderful. And being there in the summer, especially as a kid, like there's no place I would rather be. But I visited for the first time in the winter time a few years ago in January, and like so depressing, man. Like, and I hate to say it, but it's like people either wanted to leave, our city for the capital city, or they're trying to go somewhere else in Europe, or trying to come here, trying to come to Canada. So,
is Albania is part of the European Union?
No.
No? Okay, I couldn't remember.
Interesting. They're trying, but good luck.
Best of luck to you. Wow, that's crazy. Thank you so much for being on today, though. Oh, you were going to say something? Yeah,
I feel like I'm pitching my country very. Oh, there's a puppy. I can't ignore the puppy.
Hey there.
Hello. I feel like I'm pitching it so pessimistically, but like I love. Like that's not. I guess what I'm saying is like I wouldn't, move to the city my parents grew up in, because I grew up in New York City and I'm used to a very different rhythm, but
I would love to go visit Albania someday. I think it'd be very fun. I'd love to see one of the bunkers. If I ever go to Albania, I'm going to record an episode of this podcast in one of those bunkers.
You have get a nice echo going.
Very cavernous.
It's a beautiful country.
Nice.
I'm a bit biased, but like great people, very friendly. Like, you know, we love people showing interest in the language and the history. So
not everything civil war and brutal communist dictators. There's good things too.
Yeah, we got good food. We got beautiful beaches. We got goats. Like,
I love goats.
Lots of stray dogs.
Oh, I don't know if that's usually a selling point.
It's nice to see him around.
Right. Well, thank you very much for being on the podcast. You've done a very good job of selling Albania, at least to me. I don't know about our listeners. Is there anything you want to say on your way out, or anywhere people can find you if there's anything you want to plug?
No, thanks for having me and
sure
thinking of me. Happy to be your token Albanian friend. Always happy to rep. But,
Mary,
this was a lot of fun.
You are not the token Albanian friend. You are the only Albanian friend.
Oh. But yeah, I mean, I learned a lot.
Cool.
This is really like interesting conversation. Yeah, and I hope other people enjoy the story.
Yeah, I think they will. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Bye.